It's another beautiful Saturday morning, and that means it's time for another Not Playing Politics with Alexander Keaton and my ever devoted Rio, Nick Bradshaw. Nick, how the heck are you doing?
Hey, buddy. Good morning. How are you?
So far, so good. Cannot complain. Cannot complain. So, today's show, we're going to talk about the Israeli UAE peace treaty and Kamala Harris, as Joe Biden's VP pick. My question, though, is this. So let's start off with Kamala Harris, and let me ask the question this way. And maybe it's not even a question. Maybe it's more of a statement. I want to hear what your thought is. I think that the fact that they picked Kamala Harris is an indication that they don't believe that they're going to win. And so unlike everyone else is like, oh, well, they got her so she could help them with this. And it's like, no. I think this is the absolute evidence that they don't believe that they're going to win. I think they put Kamala Harris there because she's someone who had she had the least potential for future political success in the Democratic Party. I think that's why she was chosen. I don't think she was chosen to help with anything. I think she was put there because when they lose catastrophically, she's the one for whom her political future will be destroyed, but that's fine. She didn't have one anyway. And I know that sounds very counter to what everyone else is saying and suggesting, but let's take a look at the same things everyone's saying about her history. And then I think it becomes apparent she wasn't picked because she helps the ticket. She was picked because their failure damages someone who didn't really have a potential future. I mean, just look at her, just how she ran her last campaign. Everyone said, "Well, she's a great candidate. She's great. She's a great politician, but she ran a bad race." I don't think that actually flies. I don't think it was that she ran a bad campaign. I think it's just because she was bad. I think people saw through her. That's why she was never popular. That's why she bowed out before they even went to the primaries. She's too easily destroyed on her record. Tulsi Gabbard proved that. One sentence, she was completely destroyed. I don't think she has any popularity. I don't think that anyone supports her. She was picked because she's a sacrificial lamb. What are your thoughts?
Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll next week on Not Playing Politics. Okay, let's unpack this kind of step by step. I think what we have to do is what we've tried to do on this show, and I think we've tried to do it from the beginning, which is discuss the whys kind of over the hows to see where it is. So let's take it from the very, very superficial level of 10-second clip on the news as to what was there. So Joe Biden said all along that he wanted to pick a woman of color. So right out of the gates, you kind of knew what you were going to have to consider as far as being a voter of the Democrat Party, because it was being projected. You weren't going to get Tim Kaine again. You weren't going to get probably any Democrat candidate that was out there that may have been, the point that was raised that I saw that was interesting. It was forget the identity politics behind it. Forget the campaign promise of picking a woman of color. Forget picking a minority. Forget all of those aspects. There were like somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 other Democrat candidates that stayed in the election in the primaries longer than Kamala did. And the problem we run into is that, did they not have, did the voters not give their own opinion and state their beliefs by getting behind guys like Pete Buttigieg, and people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and whatever you would have? I mean, if we take it from a position of status, of vote, there were other people that tracked better within the Democrat Party. Mm-hmm. Kamala was one of the first to drop out. She was polling somewhere near 7% in her own state of California. So let's take this to the next step. So he didn't pick her based off of her performance. So the next question has to be, did he pick her based off of what she can deliver? Well, what does she deliver? Excuse me. She delivers California. Excuse me.
But does she?
But California's going to come to you with a red bow on it anyway. Pardon the pun.
Precisely.
Blue bow.
Well, no, that's exactly. Yeah, no, that's precisely my point. Yeah, she doesn't give you California at all.
Well, California is going to come to you anyway. The question is, what's going to happen down ticket in California? Because what you're going to also start to see is that, will she deliver the vote to female voters? Will she deliver the vote to minority voters? In 2016, African-American vote did not break for Hillary Clinton. So having a woman at the top of the ticket might not have been the draw. Now, there are those who say that, I've spoken with friends of mine that are African-American that said that they viewed Hillary Clinton with a less than favorable perspective. It's not me trying to blanket all African-American voters. I'm simply trying to pass on the conversations that I've had, particularly with people that I know personally. What I would also say is that if she's not going to deliver because of her performance in debates, if she's not going to deliver because she's not in a state like Stacey Abrams where you want to fight for it like Georgia, but you're in a state like California, okay, so she's not necessarily delivering a state. Will she deliver female voters? Will she deliver African-American voters? I don't know. That'll have to pan out as it is. The thing that I think is interesting is the baggage, to answer your question, in this kind of, as we from that superficial level to the higher tiers of considering this. What does she stand for? What does she bring? And potentially, what are the negatives? I think what she brings is the way the news is starting to carry her. They didn't really like her as an independent candidate. I mean, they really didn't. She didn't fare well in media. And that whole scene with Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, they must have played that, as this single she was just dismembered on stage. I mean, it was terrible to watch. I mean, unless you're super into the whole political gotcha moment thing, but I mean, she was just utterly shut down, and she just couldn't go from there. So we have to think about what she does bring. Okay. So what she brings is a very progressive, until she flip-flops. She seems to flip-flop a lot. She doesn't use the term flip-flop. She uses the term clarify. That's the new, let me clarify, I misspoke, words like that. So when it comes to healthcare, she originally, as you may recall, she was a supporter and a co-sponsor of the Medicare for All Act with Bernie Sanders. Well, she tied herself right there to the bluest of the blue in the party. But then she even went on to clarify, that she was wanting to get rid of the waste and bureaucracy in private insurance. But does that mean she wants to hang on to it? Or I think she's just showing her savvy for wanting to be able to track towards the middle in a general election, but in a primary to stand out. But in the age of, video footage everywhere on iPhones, you can't do that anymore. When it comes to abortion, she supported things like, she's got 100% rating, from groups like Neural. But she's talked about, as far, there has been conversation about her supporting people like Governor Ralph Northam, going on about post-birth abortion, which it's just murder. I mean, I'm not going to take any perspective on the whole pro-life, pro-choice for this topic. I'm saying when a life is born and you then execute it, that's murder. With regard to climate change, she's talked about wanting to pass a $10 trillion economic plan. She wants to get to reducing and conserve 30% of the lands and oceans by 2030. I mean, she's very much someone that I think would push the Green New Deal perspective. When it comes to gun control, she's certainly talked about using executive action on the first 100 days. So why do I bring this up? I bring it up because what I see is a lot more of her inciting the vote from the other side. Let me tell you something. You got 5 million NRA members that just heard one thing out of what I just said, because 5 million people are clearly listening to this show right now. And that is that she's going to use executive action after 100 days and try to appoint someone potentially like Beto O'Rourke. Well, you just guaranteed a voting block of 5 million people for Donald Trump. I mean, literally right there, just solidified. I don't care if you were the bluest Twitter blue check left-leaning progressive liberal in the world. If you are a Second Amendment right advocate and you just heard a potential vice president talking about how her first 100 days when she was running for president, who is known for her authoritarian perspectives, who's known for her ability to abuse power when given that. Look at her record in California. I challenge and charge everyone listening to the show, go read about her her activism and her policy application as Attorney General. This is not new stuff. This has been out there for decades. And they heard that she's going to use this 100-day action to federalize gun control. Now, can she do that? No, it would get locked up in the courts for years. But in an election year, what did the voters hear? I'm coming for your guns. What did Beto O'Rourke say? You're darn right, I'm coming for your assault rifle. Okay. So, to answer your question, my friend, I see more of what I hope this makes sense when I say it. I see more of what she brings for Republicans than I do Democrats. Now, maybe this supports your idea that this year, this election, the sacrificial election, Biden won't answer questions in interviews. He won't even give interviews. When he does, they're so controlled that they're not interviews.
Oh, of course they're not interviews.
And so to answer that, I mean, I know that was a roundabout way, but I wanted to address it from the perspective of it's why is freedom good? Go.
No, but that's exactly my point.
I appreciate it. Yeah. I appreciate you giving me a chance to explain it. Thank you.
Exactly. All you did was support my thesis, which is she was chosen because she's a sacrificial lamb. She doesn't bring anything to the ticket. She's not very likable, even amongst Democrats. And she is so catastrophically vulnerable on many, many things. Again, let's just look at her record as Attorney General of California. There was some shady stuff that went on that she did that a lot of people, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, like pretty much everyone was like, "Whoa, what is this?" I mean, there were people on death who had death row charges that they were, even though it's California, you're never going to be executed in California, but she withheld exculpatory evidence. Like, this is a big deal. She is not this is not someone that you would have picked, except unless you expect this whole thing to collapse. Now, I will say this one thing. There's one other possibility as to why she was picked, or at least the thing that may have pushed her over the edge. Her history is remarkably self-serving as far as a politician goes, right? Let's face it, all politicians are self-serving. No big reveal, like, congratulations, the sky is blue and water is wet, right? I mean, she's a very, politicians are self-serving. But
this is one point I think we can acknowledge. This is one point that I do think we can acknowledge, that, if we're looking at opportunism as a calling card, I absolutely believe that it applies to what we're talking about this morning. Absolutely. Yeah. But I this is that one case when I do need to absolutely step up, and I think if I'm going to remotely present this as something that I believe in and be, honest about our perspectives on here. Yeah. I mean, that and that's not just on both sides of the aisle. That's in all aspects of life. We know people that are very ambitious that way. For crying out loud, Shakespeare wrote plays about it. It's very much, this just happens to be the realm that we see it in. I would say that it very much applies to Kamala, very much so. And I think she's known for that. I think that's, again, what is this coming to? I think there are those on the left, on the very, very far progressive left, that are going to look at her and think, wait a minute, hold on a second. They're holding signs with like beards and, glasses and, defund the police. And then on the other side, but just for kicks, let's make the state of California's top cop our Attorney General. Let's make her vice president. So I struggle with the logic and the reasoning behind it because I don't understand it. And I don't mean that passive aggressively. I fundamentally don't understand. I don't support the defund movement. So.
Right. Well, so this goes back to my entire thesis. I think this is the other reason. I'm going to be let me talk about Joe Biden for 2 seconds, and I want to get rid of all of the hackneyed, everyone, he's not a real candidate. He's, Shapiro's like he's not even an alive person, that kind of thing, right? So I'm going to speak from my own personal experience and training that I've had, because this is something I kind of have to deal with. In the financial realm, are people who are, whether or not they are capable of actually executing certain transactions, right? So I'm trained on elder abuse. Here's the thing. Biden is in a situation where he is aware of what's going on, right? We can drop the pretense. He's not he's not someone with full blown Alzheimer's who thinks he's in 1967 Monte Carlo, playing with James Bond. This is, my grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's. I mean, there was times when she would literally just walk around holding her tray because she thought she was in a diner she worked in the 60s, right? I mean, that's not where he is. Has he slowed down? Yes. Does he get confused from time to time? Yes. And it's one of those situations where if I sat him down and I looked at the paperwork he was handing me, if it looked like everything was legitimately like it was him and his wife, and it was clearly what was best, and there was no hint of anyone else profiting off something, okay, I'd let it slide. I think he's probably fairly competent to make this decision overall. But if I saw one other person involved in it who was younger and maybe stood to benefit, I would call that entire thing into question. Because this is where things get interesting. He knows what he's doing most of the time. His confusion comes with not where he is, but he just, it's a sort of deterioration where he's skipping steps in that line. There is someone behind Joe Biden and the Joe Biden presidency. We all admit that, right? We all know that. Biden himself has never been a popular candidate. He was vice president, but that's because he was the least threatening vice president, right? Literally the vice presidency is just your stand-in.
Well, he was also vice president behind a very, someone a transaction. I mean, I don't want to say transcendent per se, but in the time, you could say that Barack Obama carried with him a presence that certainly vaulted Biden. President Obama was paying the bills in that administration.
Absolutely. That's my whole exactly.
People weren't comforted by the fact that Joe Biden was president. In fact, you're seeing stories coming out already where President Obama, and evidently there's been some conversation behind closed doors about the two of them, and how President Obama stated that don't underestimate Joe's ability to get things messed up. So,
yeah. No, and that's exactly my point.
It's not likable for our gentler listening ears.
Yeah, no, but that's my point, right? Biden has never been an overly successful national candidate. He never has been. The only claim he has to fame is really, outside of selling us out to China and a few other things, is, hey, I used to be Barack Obama's VP pick. Like, that's the only thing. He was never really popular. This is very much, I would argue, his candidacy is he's someone who's being propped up by the party writ large, and maybe even the powers within the party. Perhaps because maybe from day one, they're like, no one's going to beat Trump in this election. Let's just get somebody out there who again, let's sacrifice people who are not going to really move our party forward in the future anyway, i.e. him. But I think there's the second part, and this is where we're coming back to Kamala. I think they were also looking for people for whom, if for somehow there was a miracle and they did win, would take orders. Biden is clearly in a position where he's taking orders. I think Kamala, being the opportunist she is also one of the people who is willing to take orders.
Well, that's why they're saying this election should actually be posed. This election should be posed as Trump versus Harris, and that he should position himself in the campaign to say, Joe, I'm not even running against you. That the Trump campaign should posture itself in such a way that it's not even looking at Joe Biden. And Joe Biden's a hard target to hit. I mean, look, nothing stuck. A woman came out with what appeared to be credible allegations against him, and that was just dismissed. Nothing is sticking, and it's kind of, well, he's Uncle Joe, right? He's this calm, cool, collected, and whatever, and he's older, and everything bounces off of him. Senator Harris is a lightning rod. If you saw her in the Kavanaugh hearings, the Justice Kavanaugh hearings, I mean, she's very clearly, in my opinion, showed views that I thought, just through open lines of dialogue, you could see she seemed to be fairly aggressive towards things like people of faith and different values, and then again, it didn't seem to happen. It seemed extraordinarily one-sided, and again, I don't know that I think she is an authoritarian opportunist who's a politician who's looking for an opportunity to get to power. And I don't even blame her for that, because I understand that cultural perspective.
Well, that's my whole point. Again, all politicians are opportunists. My point is, though, she does seem cravenly so. Like I said, it's like, let's forget the politician there. She just seems like you said, she's an authoritarian. She's an opportunist. I think she and Biden both are running and are now the president and vice presidential pick for two reasons. One, neither of them had any real future in the Democratic Party on a national level. Like they just don't. They would never have these things. It's kind of obvious. Secondly, both because of Joe. Joe's always wanted to be president, but he's never had the ability to really be elected on a national ticket. And Harris, again, I think these are two people who are willing to make deals and do what they're told. That's why they're in the position they're in. I think everyone's trying to come at this like you said, you're trying to understand the logic of this. And what I'm saying is the logic is they're not trying to win.
Right. And see, I don't want to believe that all politicians are just opportunists. I want to maintain and march somewhere. I have to keep it. Call it blind idealism. I want to believe.
Blind idealism.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to believe that there are those who do truly want to act in the service of our country. And it's funny because you mentioned like, well, her career, really, where is she going? It's funny. I look at it like this is someone who's the honor of serving as a senator for the United States of America on behalf of the people of California. I can't even imagine the humility that it must feel like to have kind of opportunity. And I mean that genuinely. I really do. And specifically a senator. Remember, there's only 100 of them. I mean, that's, or anyone that gets to serve a level, a governor, there's only 50 of them, but to get to serve and to work on behalf of our country that way, I refuse to believe that there are no good people to do things. And I know that's not what you're saying.
That's not what I'm saying. No, let's hold on. That's not what I'm saying. And you know that. Secondly,
right.
Let's
I believe that not everyone is a diehard opportunist.
Right. And I didn't say that. She is, but she is. And that's my point. You're looking at it through how you view things, right? You would view being a senator as something that's humbling. Because you're like, people have put this kind of faith in me. I'm here to serve the people. That's how you view that role. I'm here to tell you that's not how she views that role. She and many others are looking for power for themselves, for their purposes.
Sure.
So again, this goes back to why you say you can't logically understand what's happening here. That's because you're trying to make it fit a framework that you are familiar with and a framework that you would agree with. And what I'm saying is the logic is everything about this election makes perfect sense if you believe they weren't intended to win. Or as a backup plan, if they do win, these are the people who would take them orders the best. I think those are the two caveats you have to look at. Once you factor those in, everything about this race makes absolute 100% sense.
Well, I think we spoke about this last time we had Tim Drake on, who's hopefully listening this morning, and bringing up the point about where we see kind of this. Tim and I have had many conversations regarding what a policy voter is. Right? There's these chasms between what we seem to believe. I mean, right now, if you talk about law and order, I mean, it's just the way that and I'm not trying to say that these things belong to one party. I have a great many friends that are probably more liberal and vote Democrat that I think are law-abiding, tax-paying, God-fearing, family-loving people. But I'm saying the narrative being cut together in the news, if you're law and order, you're a Republican. If it's all about, the what's going on with regard to riots and the concept of defunding the police nationally, I mean, what's going on? There's a very, 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 there's not a line. There's a trench between the two. I mean, there's almost, as we were talking about before, I may brought this up to Tim, what's something that both parties align with right now? I mean, is it abortion? Is it gun rights? Is it the border? Is it funding for the military? Is it funding for the police? Is it the BLM movements? Is it Antifa's participation in those movements? Is it our perspective with, what we're seeing with the new agreement to come out between Israel and the United Arab Emirates? I mean, like, where is that one point we can come together and go, you know what? We all agree that hot dogs are better than hamburgers. Like, where are we?
Son of a monster.
Good night, everybody.
Hot dogs are better than hamburgers? What kind of Nazi, commie-loving trash bin did you come from?
I mean, there's a line to cross, and I guess I just
crossed it over it, my friend.
Absolutely. But again, we have to be careful, and we wanted to have this show for the purposes of not going, we're like this, they're like that. I think there are a great many people out there, left, right, center, whatever you want to call it, that have to look at some of these things and go, this is just crazy. And again, that's why I don't want to make this that Kamala is a bad person or any of this. I just don't understand the strategy politically behind her selection. I don't think she comes across as likable. Again, the media's fawning over her now. 3-4 months ago, they could care less.
Well, okay, so here's the
I
thing,
don't see that California, which you were going to get anyway. Her policies are extreme in every direction with regard to abortion, border security, funding of the police, or that of the Second Amendment. So you're just going to push a lot of, I mean, let's call it what it is. At the end of the day, this election, if you're not a policy voter, this election is who do you like less, right? And or who do you dislike less for a lot of us. How many stickers? I've seen more stickers that say any competent adult, campaign stickers as a joke. I've seen more of those than I've seen Biden stickers. And I live in a very, very, very progressive city.
Oh, yeah. No, and you absolutely do. So let me make 2 points. I'm gonna kind of do them in reverse order as the point you made. Firstly, I've already explained the situation as far as the logic. Again, I go back to you're looking at this from a perspective of this is someone who wants to win, who wants to unify the country, and that's the problem. You're not looking at the way they're looking at it. Secondly, the reason that they love her now, though they didn't like her just a few months ago, goes back to sort of what we're going to talk about next with the UAE Israeli peace deal. Our media is no longer a news media. It is a propaganda wing of the Democrat Party. And that's just and let me be very specific about this, because you're talking about we don't want to put two people, people over here. This is why there is the walk away movement. The things that you're describing, the fact that there are Democrats who are like, this whole defund the police thing, this radicalism, this Antifa, even some of the stuff that's talked about with some of these other movements, they're like, they don't appreciate it. They're like, this is not what I signed up for, and they're leaving the Democrat Party. And I'm not saying that they should become Republicans. In fact, I think we need to have 4 or 5 different parties. I think that would be, I think there would be some sanity if we actually had 4 or 5 different parties. That's sort of the thing, right? I mean, I don't want to have a complete parliamentary system, but we were never supposed to have parties to begin with. We were supposed to listen to the ideas. Well, if all of a sudden now you have 4 or 5 different parties instead of just the 2, then there's going to be more conversation over ideas again. So that's why I'm kind of more for that. I'm not saying if you don't agree you should become a Republican. What I'm saying, though, is, to your point, there are a lot of people who don't like what's happening in the Democratic Party, and they are walking away from it. And this is an example of it. But the news media is absolutely just the propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. When Kamala Harris was just an independent, was just another candidate, they felt free to shoot at her with both barrels, right? It's like, hey, let's look at the fact that Tulsi Gabbard called you out on all the shady crap that you pulled back in California, and this may be a problem. And now that she's the vice president, oh, look at how wonderful she is. She's this wonderful, moderate. That's my favorite thing. This woman 6 months ago was considered in the top 5 of radically left senators by everyone's account. Now she's a moderate. Like, moderate compared to whom? Joseph Stalin? I mean, it's the 180 degree flip that has been done on her by her, by her news coverage is emblematic of our next topic, which is the Israeli UAE peace accord. If anyone else had done the Israeli UAE peace accord, which, by the way, it's not just the UAE. People are saying that now that the UAE has done this, countries like Oman, Yemen, a few others are going to follow suit with almost identical agreements. A lot of these Arab and Muslim nations are going to be able to, because of what the UAE has done, is basically they're going to fall into place. And had this been anyone but Donald Trump, the news media would have been calling for their, for multiple Nobel Peace Prize for what he's done and what his team has done. Because it's not just it's not just the UAE, it's numerous other states that are looking to sign these very similar peace accords with Israel, which opens up, by the way, for those who aren't aware, let's do a little digging here. Not only does it, what it does is it normalizes relations with Israel. So they can do monetary exchanges, they can do trade. So this is a massive economic benefit to the UAE and to these other nations that are going to follow suit, because Israel's very, very prosperous for a lot of reasons. And so it's going to open up that trade, and it also will allow their easier access for those nations, for the Muslims in those nations, to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Like, this is a big deal. And this is something that, and we can talk about this on another day, but this is something that I think people really just don't appreciate, either in our media or in culture at large, how much trouble Israel goes through to make certain that people of all faiths can visit the Holy Land and actually be safe and worship in the way that's approved. If you're a Muslim, you get to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You get to go to the Dome of the Rock. If you're Jewish or Christian, you get to safely visit the Wailing Wall. These are huge, big things. The church of that's supposed to be where the cross is, his tomb. These are all things that Israel takes very seriously. Yeah, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's like
if I can jump in,
these are big deals. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge thing, and I want to take a step back. You mentioned about the media. I want to be careful. First off, the term itself gets misused. I mean, the term media itself is a plural form of medium, right? So we've got. I mean, there's so many different forms out there. I think a lot of us, just kind of make equal in our minds this thought. When I say the word media, I'm talking about CNN News. Well, okay, the media is a massive collection of channels and distribution channels and pipelines of information across multiple platforms, hence the term media and not medium. But what I'm getting at is what I think the shift has taken place is not just the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, and saying that. I mean, that's fine. I was looking at some headlines this morning, and you can see the differences between that of the New York Times and the Washington Post. And I don't want to lend or take away credibility from either one. I simply want to state the factual perspective. And, when one is titled Israel and the United Arab Emirates strike major diplomatic agreement, and one is titled Despite the UAE-Israel deal, Trump will leave the Mideast a bigger mess than he found it. That's out of the Post. My point that I would say is this. Through the transformation of what was called new media, it's no longer new media, let's call it what it is, the digital platforms created through social media and online news sources, the shift that took place was we went from hard news in some perspectives, your Walter Cronkites and people as such, more to everybody's a blogger. Everybody is an op-ed writer. Everybody. There are very few people that actually hold a line as a strong news reporter, an actual balls and strikes. That's what it is. And it's because of many things. Number one, to get people on your channel, you need to have clicks and likes, and that's how you get monetized and keep people where you need to be. So you need to be sensational. When you have major conglomerates that are all bundled together as part of a package owned by other corporations, you've monetized news. When you've created an environment that there is a dollar sign at the end, go to the largest, when they see that Fox News has outrated every other cable news show for like 40 something months in a row. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It just keeps going and go for years. Well, is it really? Is it because Fox News is so much stronger? Is it because the other ones are so much weaker? Or is it common sense? People making brown suits and one shop making blue suits. So if you want a blue suit, you only have one place to go. So for a lot of conservatives out there, for a lot of people that just want a different opinion, I think that their perspective is, look, CNN, NBC, MSNBC, whatever, they're all interchangeable. You're literally hearing the same story 500 times. So if you switch the story to a different channel,
well, it's the same story, it's the same language.
You get that.
Yeah.
Apart that model, because now we're going back to that original they were, right? In an environment where people are kind of digitally going back to that. You mentioned Ben Shapiro earlier. Ben Shapiro is, a nice guy, I'm sure. He's, out of Southern California. He's this dude who gets 100 million, gives him that credibility, that reach. But now if you want to go and listen to the news with someone's perspective, why would I listen to CBS? I can go listen to Ben Shapiro, somebody may say. And again, you have 500 other people out there, 1,000. I mean, how many people use Twitter as their main news source? How many people use Facebook? How many people use Joe Rogan as their news source? How many people use, XYZ, whatever? The point that I'm getting at is that whether you're listening to Andrew Wilkow or Dave Rubin, or you read Breitbart, on the other side you're listening to Rachel Maddow, or CNN, or Brian Stelter, or anyone else, you there's your perspective. But what has increased is access. But we've talked about this before. There's so many different outlets now. You can almost tell what someone's reading or who they're following based off of the talking points they use. And that's why I wanted us, when we got together on this show, is to not just be, as you said earlier today, I appreciate it. We don't want to be like, an additional echo chamber. We don't want to be like an echo of the echo chamber and just throw out the stuff again and again and again and again. If people want to know what Ben Shapiro thinks, go listen to Ben Shapiro's show. If you want to know what Brian Stelter thinks, go watch his show. We want to bring the perspective of why is this happening. So firstly, what I wanted to say was, I don't want to just put the media, air quote, into this blanket statement of, in the pocket. Now, what I will say is this: the overwhelming number in sheer volume and mass and magnitude, if you will, I think comes from one direction, overwhelmingly. Of course, I'll give you an anecdotal example, because that's how I tend to view things. For 2.5 years, the Rachel Maddow show, who I've said all along I think is a tremendous orator. I don't align with anything that she prescribes politically, but I think that she's a tremendous orator and a very good writer, a very well-educated woman. Maddow show committed itself to being the "We Are the Russia Collusion" channel. The other day, criminal proceeding that could be moving forward, and how many more to come. News outlet that covered a story for 2.5 years. News is simply manipulating the narrative to import your own idea. And they do it through a babies and beards and, black little ski masks and, fight the power. No, it's just, you don't acknowledge. It's like not talking about the uncle that you all have that is an alcoholic that kind of used to beat your aunt or something. It's that horrible, horrible thing that no one wants to talk about or acknowledge. So we just don't talk about it, so it's not there. And that's the risk. That's the danger that I think that we see. So you can craft these narratives as easily as you want. And the memory is so short that now all of a sudden you have people. How do you get people to buy into a Kamala Harris presidency or vice presidency when she was so wholly rejected? Because I think we're at a time right now that the Biden campaign is trying to capitalize on what they see as happening with regard to this and the BLM engagement in these protests and riots. And that's what I think they're doing. They're
So
trying to
let's
capitalize on the most important thing you can have in a political campaign. That's energy.
well, hold on. Let's put a pin in that for just 2 seconds. Firstly, you may want to find a slightly different place closer to your Wi-Fi. You've been cutting in and out a little bit. But let's go back to the concept of the media. I get what you're saying, right? There are now, you've got talk radio, you have digital platforms, you've got all these different things. But when colloquially, everyone knows when I say the media, that means big media. That basically does not include Fox News, right? There's now Newsmax and all these in the One America channel and all these other things that are out there, right? But people know that what we mean is, and what is meant by the media is sort of the traditional media. It like you said, it's ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, New York Times, MSNBC, right? It's that conglomerate of where the vast majority of people still get their news from. Now, you're right. Over the last few years, we've had a change. There's a shift. Well, now, though, we still have to realize that Yahoo News and Twitter and Facebook is still getting stuff from that traditional news media. And they are now also kind of engaged in that idea of using them as their fact checkers, of using those same ideologues as the people who guide what's allowed to be shown and not shown. So perhaps what we need is a new phrase. Let's say, because let's be honest. Let's go back to the entire point here. The point is, had anyone but Trump done what he did, it would have been heralded as one of the great movements towards peace in the Middle East over the last 30 years. It would have been nonstop. That's all they were talking about all day for at least a week. And yet, what we have now is, well, yeah, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but it's probably going to suck. Like, this is a clear, agenda-driven, opinionated review. This is not an objective, well, let's talk about this sort of driven thing. And this goes back to Kamala Harris. Again, how did Kamala Harris get, because this is not about giving people information and allowing them to make up their minds. This is about programming people and telling them what to think. This is about trying to control opinion. Now, I know you've said this before, and I would agree. The media cannot necessarily come out and tell you what to think, but they can present the information in such a way that it does control what your conclusions are. But let's be honest, I'm going to take it one step further. They're just flat out telling you what to think half the time.
Well, what I would say is that, yeah, and I understand your description of media. I wasn't trying to contest that, but I'm just saying I think that the media has disintegrated from these large corporations. I mean, that's still very much present, absolutely, but there are new channels that are coming out, and so it's just pushing of an op-ed opinion everywhere. I mean, again, the number of op-ed stories, Vice, that Hard News, I think that'd be an interesting, number to tally. What I'm saying is that the media, so what agenda setting and a lot of these different communication theories talks about is that you cannot control what people think, but you can create an environment, so the theory states, that you can create an environment such that you keep a certain amount of stories in play, we'll call it, right? Again, a year ago, everything was Russia, Stormy Daniels, Michael Avenatti, Michael Cohen. That was it. Those were the biggest stories. A year and a half ago, it was Brett Kavanaugh. Everything was just about getting Justice Kavanaugh and all this, and now it's BLM, COVID, and the election. And so what that states is it can't control what you think, but it can certainly create an environment to control what you think about. And that you're right. I mean, had any other president done this, the Obama administration was awarded a prize for their campaign for president in 2008. Now, that was a magical time for a lot of people, and it created an environment people thought was very inspiring, and that's great. Does it warrant a Nobel Peace Prize? I don't know. I don't really know what the credentials are for that. But a deal like this, you're right. I think it's going to be underplayed. You can't give a victory. You can't let up. You can't let up, and that's what people see. You keep hearing these people talk about this wipeout that's going to happen in this election, comparing it to Walter Mondale and Geraldine Ferrara in 1984 against Reagan. Biden is not out there talking. Yes, I get it, the coronavirus, and I get it. But people know, they can see it. they can see that he's hiding in this closet, in this bunker, this basement, this whatever. I mean, what do people think Joe Biden thinks? I mean, I don't know. This isn't me attacking this former vice president. It's me saying, what do people definitively believe other than a protest vote as to why they're voting? Is it because of the policies that he's put out? I'm not aware of many policies that he's put out. He's only shared a few opinions. That's where I see the crafting of the narrative. That's where I see the protection and the cover fire coming from. And that's where your Twitter mob comes in.
Right. And that goes back to the entire point of and this is probably a conversation for another day. But you know what? This could be our last little segment here, our state of the union kind of commentary, or state of affairs, which is, let's talk about Twitter for a second. Let's actually talk about this digital age we live in. Twitter is the biggest it is the tool used to manipulate the news and, again, how people perceive things that I've ever seen. This is probably, if you ever want to use the word psyop, that's Twitter. And let me give you an example of this. That's sort of disconnected from politics, right? Last year, year before last, now I don't even remember. 2020 is just, I don't even know when things are happening anymore. I think it was last year when they announced that Ariel, for the live action Little Mermaid, was going to be this black actress, right? I don't remember her name. I just remember the event. Everyone freaked out because and everyone very quickly started showing this Twitter reaction. Everyone was like, "Oh man, look at how Twitter and Facebook, they're blowing up with this hatred for with racism against this black actress being announced as Ariel." Right? They kept showing you the same 3 or 4 tweets, the same 3 or 4 groups. So at the time, I was doing some side work for a website. And so I'm like, you know what? Let me actually investigate this. I want to see how many people does this really represent. So I checked every single tweet that was provided by everyone, right? Disney itself, New York Times, everyone who wrote about it. I tracked it because it was like, again, there was like 3 to 5 tweets in one group. Like, that was it. I tracked down every one. Not one of those accounts, not one of the independent people just tweeting about it, not one of those accounts had more than 10 people on it. Not more than 10 people were following any of those accounts, and 2 of those accounts had 0 followers. So my question is, how in the world did these people even find them with 0 followers? And then of the one account that was like, sort of as counter to this Ariel, to the casting for Ariel, there was 15 people in it. And of those 15 people, not one person necessarily had anything about her being black or about the actress. It was just saying, hey, this was the character I grew up with. Why don't we just cast her the way she was originally portrayed? Like, why are we making a deliberate change or attempt to change who and what she was? So it wasn't even necessarily that she was black per se, just saying, hey, you're changing the thing that I liked. Why are we doing this? For this is the same reaction people had when the Tobey Maguire movie came out with Spider-Man, the first one. And they went from an inorganic web shooter, which was a machine that he put web fluid in, to it being organic. For those of you who are old enough to remember the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, he didn't have his web shooters were natural as a part of his powers. That was a big change for the character. People freaked out. As near as I can tell, way more people freaked out about that than freaked out about Ariel. But my point goes back to, we had 3 or 4 people in one group with maybe 15 people in it. These weren't major thought control people. These weren't people who with millions of followers. This wasn't this uprising. If you read the reports, you would have thought that hundreds of thousands of these racist people had risen up to oppose this, but it's not what happened. In fact, looking at a couple of the accounts, I would put absolute money on that they were fake. Because one of them only talked about Disney stuff. Like, that's it. It was all sort of counter stuff. And there had been a few other articles that particular account had been referenced in. Twitter is a smokescreen. There are numerous accounts of people going after conservatives and others with these big quote-unquote Twitter mobs, only to find out that there's like 4 people and the rest of them are bots. being controlled by these four people. Twitter is used as many of these other sites are being used to generate and manipulate our understanding of the world around us. This is not about, like you said, people actually talking about things. This is about hardcore psyop control. This is the media knowingly, and again, by media I mean at this point everybody, the news sources, using them inside them as sources to drive a narrative and to create an illusion of popular thought where none exists.
Okay, so first off, Twitter is weird. The sheer silliness of listening to say something like, Angela Merkel tweeted out, wow, I didn't realize that we could have people at the, state level on a global perspective, tweet out. I could just imagine what that would be like, Julius Caesar tweeted Vini Vidi Vici, hashtag, hashtag pasta powered, give me a break. It's the best thing. The best thing I ever heard is from a friend of mine who identifies very clearly. He's a good guy. I love him. He's a very, very, very socially progressive, liberal out-minded guy. And we have, good conversations. And he said it best. And he was like, dude, Twitter is where I go to scream into the void. And I was like, cool, got it. That's it. I appreciated his self-awareness and honesty with me. Because I get it, sure. And if you want to talk about psyops and different perspectives, we can bring in some guests next time that I'm sure could speak to it much more intelligently than both of us. But what I would say, certainly, but what I would say is, at the end of the day, it's where we lend credibility. And here's the thing: Twitter may have a whole lot of angst behind it, but I don't know that it has a whole lot of credibility behind it, because it's one of those things that we've spoken about on the show before, that you've got to strike that balance between. And anyone who knows me knows devoutly how much I believe that, the way you combat bad speech, as you said, is with more speech. You don't silence people. You make them defend their bad ideas. And then you expose that bad idea by posing a better idea and having it work out in the marketplace of ideas, where hopefully the best for the most can work out, of course. But Twitter is just not a platform for that. It just isn't. Twitter seems to be a place where sometimes angry people go to be angry. And if I could, before we, kind of do this wraparound here, which I like this, the state of things, if what we want to see it, that is to say, I think there's a perspective difference here. And a real last quick moment as we wrap, we've got a little bit of time here. I want to sneak this thought in here. I think one of the differences that we're seeing with regard to governance in general is that the perspectives that are socially taking place. And by that, I mean, I think when you look at the Trump administration, you see a nationalist and a populist perspective. And in that, you see much more of a, if you want to look at that nationalism, we'll call it, what some people think is a four-letter word, pride in one's country. I think there's two bases you can look at that. One is a civic perspective and one is an ethnic perspective. I think that as we've watched, the perspectives of globalism expand or contract or, succeed or fail, however you choose to view it, over the last several decades, what we have noticed is that I think that globalism in some ways, as it tends to blend together culture, it also leads for a natural feedback, which is nationalism, right? As the EU came out as this blanket statement over all of Europe, I think Italians wanted to feel their Italian pride, and the French wanted to be French, and the Germans wanted to be Germans, and and there were all these perspectives to consider. But when I want to view the topic of ethnic versus civic nationalism, I think that the perspective there that we can see that once again in this political climate we're seeing put into work. Now, anyone out there, please feel free to call in, ask questions. Thank you for listening. And those of you that always have conversations with us, we appreciate it. Please, this is something that I'm posing almost more as a question. And that is what I observe from my opinion is that the ethnic perspective of identity and nationalism seems to be what's embraced by the Democrats. It's something that I think is inherently based in race. As we've discussed on this show before, capitalism offset the Marxist attack on class structure because capitalism's blind to that. It doesn't care if you're, I mean, Mexico is one of the richest men in the world. Japan is one of the richest people in the world. Russia, places all over the world that you might not necessarily expect to see that, where you might want to just discredit and say, well, everyone here, it's, they're all big tech billionaires and that. Well, that's not true. There are people across the world, and culturally, ethnically, spiritually, their sexual identity, and all these different factors don't have to be justified to the dollar. The dollar will go where the good idea is. But I bring this up to simply say, when I see the comparison in this section particularly, I see one as inherently divisive and one inherently unifying. For the longest time, we've seen the perspective of this context of racism over the last 3-4 years, probably more so than I recall at any point in my life, except for maybe the '92 riots in LA. But I would say that the ethnic perspective is the one that's been embraced by the left and by the Democrats, which is based off of things such as race, right? Everything is about identity, everything. Where I think the civic side of nationalism has been embraced by the Republicans, which is to say, open market, free market capitalism, trade, negotiations. It's not about skin color. It's about content, or it's about thought process. It's about, what your decisions are with regard to maybe the marketplace or maybe the idea socially. I'm not saying that our identity is not something of inherent value. It absolutely is. We are all unique and beautiful in that way, and I think that should be respected and celebrated. I'm simply saying, from a national perspective, as a party line, if you were to ask people, where does race, sexual identity, and things that for some people might be inherently private, I think that one perspective on the voter electorate is directed at that being the central focus and point of who you are in your totality. That brings us back to our topic with Kamala Harris. I don't see Kamala as necessarily a leader. I would never use the word leader. I think she kind of ebbs and flows with what policies are around her and where she is that I think is most advantageous to her continued success. I think that's ambition, right? I'm not saying she's Gaius Cassius or anything, but I mean, she's somewhat. That was for my father. I'm and our fellow Shakespeare lovers. I wouldn't say that. And I think a lot of people look at it with President Trump and say the same thing. Well, this guy, he's a sleazeball. He's oh my gosh, he's gross. He's a racist. He's all thing. I think if there's one color that Donald Trump responds to, it's green. I think he is most entirely and inherently driven by, his perspectives on economic growth. I really, now, whatever other perspectives he may have, I can't get up in his head about that. But what I would say is that at the end of the day, if someone came to him with $1 million idea, I don't think, if it was a penguin, I think he would probably make a decision. I don't see Donald Trump as someone who's who's rooted in the concept of being driven as an ideologue. I just don't see him that way. I don't see him that way at all. I don't think he possesses that perspective per se. I think he views it from the perspective of, call it, just as Al Davis used to say, the owner of the Oakland Raiders, just win, baby. I mean, I absolutely believe that is his perspective. I don't think it warrants thought even beyond that. I don't think it's any deeper than that. That's not an insult to the president. I'm simply saying I don't think it's any deeper than that. I think all these other issues that we don't have control over any more than my eye color, my height and weight. Well, my weight, certainly I need to put down the donuts, but, hair color, eye color, family background, whatever. I have no control over that. And yet what we're doing is we're creating a relative scale based on all the things we can't control. And I think that's a dangerous way to go forward. And I think it's yet again another separation there. And I think that unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there, and certainly not everybody, but I think there are going to be a lot of people out there that are going to have that asterisk mentality, that are going to say, just as easily as you can celebrate and say, hey, we have a female black candidate and that would be great. Okay, is she an outstanding leader? Is she a scholarly politician? Is she a stellar person that's good at negotiation with regard to international diplomacy and qualification? Okay, let's have that conversation. I think that there are many people that will hold those things in their hearts, and regardless of the direction, some people can turn it and say, oh well, he got that because he's a white guy, or she got that because she's a black woman, or he got that because he's gay, or she got that because she's dealing with a physical ailment. When you start breaking it down to those elements, you just undermine someone's credibility. And I just think that that's a dangerous path to follow, when what I think all of us look for is that person that comes to us with that next great idea, And when the idea wins, I think we all win, regardless of our race, regardless of our sexual identity, regardless of our culture or creed. And that's what I wish we could be having, is a debate of ideas. And we're not. What we're having we're literally reducing this down to genetics. This is like the eugenicist, paradise for an election when it comes to, let's base every decision off of this. And I just think that hinders the greatest ideas from the greatest people coming out, where we don't monitor and regulate when we talk about these things, but rather we celebrate them. Kamala comes from I personally think, a phenomenally interesting background that I'd like to learn a lot more about. Her mother is Indian and her father's Jamaican. I know very little of either culture. I would love to celebrate that. But we just turned it into we live in a country that a woman of Indian Jamaican descent, born in Oakland and raised in Canada, the far off exotic land
of Canada,
is coming up to be potentially the vice president of the United States. I believe, as a first generation American citizen, natural born citizen. Is that not remarkable? Is that not tremendous? Is that not worth celebrating? Is it not worth at least acknowledging? Does it not at least challenge the narrative that America is this inherently vile and racist country? Because I can think of about 50 nations that if I showed up, I don't know that I'd be on the ballot. I can think of about 20 nations that I wouldn't be allowed into the country because of either my religious, my national, or personal identity. So I think we need to really take a deep breath here and acknowledge, I'm not here to bash Senator Harris. She's the Senator of the United States, and the position itself warrants respect. But I am here to say, can we take a moment and acknowledge possibly the inherent irony and hypocrisy of stating that we have an Indian Jamaican woman identifying and who's been, embraces African-American culture in herself, raised in Canada, living in this country, who has had this diverse background, who is up for the second highest office in the land? Because that's pretty freaking remarkable to me.
But you would say that as a cisgendered, heterosexual white guy. Your privilege is showing. How dare you think? How dare you talk about ideas?
Yeah, my privileged fingers. My privileged fingers about to hang up, my friend.
So again, I think that's a positive thing to wrap up on, and probably even really another topic worth discussing, because I think you brought up a great point. Something that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of is just what is eugenics? Where did it come from? Why is it that we're having this conversation now? And ultimately, how is this entire conversation that people think? Let me rephrase this. The conversation that's being had is not the conversation that needs to happen. Are the people who are trying to have the quote-unquote conversation right now really about trying to unite people and bring about racial harmony, or are they trying to actually create division in order to have, like you said, this sort of eugenicist dream? That's a conversation for another time. But you know what? We've come to the end of our time. So let's put that on hold for just a moment. And let's just say thank you to the 3 people who are listening to us and who look forward to putting up with us every other week. We appreciate y'all. We really appreciate y'all listening, whether live or recorded. And we look forward to doing this again in 2 weeks and having another bold conversation that's actually more about why than about how, more about, sort of sidestepping what we're being told to really actually get at the heart of the matter, so that we're no longer playing politics, but that we're actually doing politics. Politics that gets us moved forward, politics that benefits human beings and actually allows us to live together in harmony, that allows us to get our roads freaking fixed. No problem there. Anyway, but until that time, we bid you beautiful people adieu. And from Nick and myself, we hope you have a great 2 weeks, and we'll see you here next time.
Be good, everybody. Love yourself and someone else.